Welcome to the Epic Investor Podcast. I'm Rich Jarvis, and I'm sitting here with Jason Morris and James Morrell. Today, we're going to dive into something that is a game changer for every investor, and that is owning your authentic self. As you own your authentic self, you know who you are. You can make much better investment decisions that drives purpose and freedom. Let's dive in. Today, we're diving into a game changer for every investor, and essentially stop defining yourself by your job, your deals, and your bank account. The Epic Investor knows that true wealth begins with owning your authentic self, because when you're clear on who you are, every investment decision becomes a powerful step towards purpose and freedom. You know, when I was thinking of this topic, it really came down to the Epic's Investor's Guide to Unshakable Confidence and Wealth. And what does that really mean? And how do you truly get to know who you are? And how does that translate to investing? So I'm going to start off with when things go wrong, right? Because that kind of sets the stage of when you learn those really powerful lessons in life. When 2008 hit, the market shifted. At that point in time, if you can remember, if anyone was doing loans, no longer had a job doing loans. I mean, it was non-existent. And so the origination side of my business dried up. That didn't happen. And then we ended up spending 3 years. I had a 8-figure personal guarantee that I had engaged in. And we ended up spending 3 years selling everything that I owned. And in that process, and when I say everything, it was all the toys. We had, a couple airplanes, we had properties, we had, and my kids, it was so fun because we would go on these activities. We'd go snowmobiling or we'd go four-wheeling, and all the kids had their own motorcycles and things like that, right? Just stuff. But it was the experiences that we had together that was so much fun. And then all of a sudden my kids started seeing all the stuff just disappear, right? And then the time of family started going. And what that did to me personally, it was interesting because my self-worth was defined by what we had and what I was doing to provide for my family. And then in that period between 2000, it became very difficult to do that. And because I wasn't providing like I wanted to for my family, it essentially became where I got to a point where I stopped feeling anything. I think I was in a depression. I was never diagnosed or anything like that, but I was in a depression. And what was interesting about that is, my family stuck with me, and to them, they don't care about the stuff, right? What they care about is a husband and father in a home doing what he should be doing. And in my world at the time, I was incapable of providing for my family in a way that I truly needed to provide. And so this is where it came to, of just understanding, the difference between self-confidence, knowing who you are, and basing your identity on something that's external to you. And if you think about it, in society, how many times do we often equate success with the position someone has, their titles, how much net worth they have?
I would say we typically do that every time.
Yeah. Especially in the USA. It's very commonplace here.
Have you ever heard of in our culture, when kids are young, and it's like the phrase, what do you want to do when you grow up? Or what do you want to be? They want to be a fireman or a policeman, or it's interesting. And so as from our youth, we're almost trained to focus on the what, it's everything's transactional. How different would it be if we could say, who do you want to be when you grow up?
Mm-hmm. I love that.
Just a completely different mind shift, isn't it?
One word changed the entire depth of that question.
It does. And I think one of the things that I just wanted to just share and talk about, I'd love to get your take on it, but it's when you tie your self-worth to something external, you limit your ability to achieve the best version of yourself. You cannot progress to that point where you become who you were meant to be, because your focus is everything but.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's kind of like back to our episode on ego. The external can destroy us when you rely so heavily on it. This actually reminds me, though, of a story of my sister. So she, after college, spent 2 years abroad, traveled across Europe, but she lived in Spain. And one of the stories that she told me about her time there in Europe was that there's kind of this culture of over there, they work to live. They work just enough so they have enough money so they can live a good lifestyle. Whereas it's more commonplace in the U.S., we live to work. We are constantly in the hustle culture, the grind. And I think there's a lot of great things that come from that. But this constant status, my title, the job, all these things, I think it can cloud your happiness. Whereas I think other people, they view things so different across the globe. And that quote just stuck with me because you get so attached. It's just part of our culture. You get attached to things. When what matters, I mean, when you're on your deathbed, are you going to look back and say, I wish I had spent more time trying to raise our shareholder value, right? Or
I wish I got that title.
Yeah, I wish I was the VP or whatever it is. Of course you're not. You're going to think of the time that you didn't spend with your family and your friends doing things that truly mattered.
There was someone was talking about a very wealthy individual, and he made the comment that he left a sizable amount behind, and someone was, well, how much? And he says, well, all of it. He didn't take any of it with him, right? But what he did take with him was the legacy he left behind, the relationships he built. I think a lot of times we attach self-worth to things external, but when we can inverse that and attach our self-worth to our divine nature of who we truly are, authentic selves, I think it changes everything.
I served a mission for my church. You spend 2 years sharing the message of God with people. And I went to Paraguay. I went down to South America. And the experience that is coming to my mind related to this is there are positions on a mission. You can become a leader in the mission. And a lot of kids at the age of 18 and 19, some of them, they're there out of obligation. They're there because they want to be there. And others are there and they're striving to be the next leader in that mission. Most missionaries want to become an assistant to the mission leader, the president of that mission. Well, I had the experience of being a leader in the mission, not an assistant, but I was a leader over several missionaries. And this missionary, he spent, and when he got to my apartment, before we started our 6 weeks together, he started crying. The moment he drops his bags, he's just crying. I'm like, what's wrong? And he said, I have spent my entire mission, 18 months, trying to become this assistant. And he became the assistant. He was an assistant for a year. He did great. He was a great example. He taught everybody how to be more effective and better. But he was crying because he had wasted his time focusing on one thing. I wanted that title. I wanted to be that person. And he looked at me and said, I need to make up for lost time, because he felt this failure to God. You kind of spend this 2 years dedicated to God. And I looked at him and said, let's go. And for anybody who knows, and you see those missionaries out there in white shirts and ties and black name tags, he said, can we run from door to door every day? And I don't back down from a challenge. So I said, let's go, right? And so we ran to help make up for time. But what I liked about what you said, Rich, is when you focus on becoming the CEO or becoming the VP, or I want to make these investments because I want to be able to buy, the lake house or the planes, those aren't bad things. However, what I heard you saying was you put yourself into a box or into a lane that you're so focused on that you lose the opportunity to experience everything else that comes in its way and develop who you really are meant to become. And then what you can offer society is lost because you were so focused on, I got to be the president. I got to be the VP. I got to be the guy in the neighborhood with the baddest car.
Along those veins, I remember a tragic event that happened, a friend in high school. So this was after high school. He had built up a very successful real estate business. When the crash happened, it hit him and his business extremely hard. And he ended up ending his life.
Mm.
And what's interesting is when you get to that point and you don't think there's any value left, I think that's one of the most tragic examples of putting the self-worth somewhere where it should not be. And you think back and it's like, well, where was I when that was going on? And so just, I think a note too, when we're dealing with so many different people, we never know what they're going through. And just, it's kind of a side note. When things happen and go wrong, or people potentially give offense, or they're doing things that aren't quite their normal behavior, be kind, because we don't know what they're truly going through. Just had to say that. Have you ever heard of the phrase "know thyself"?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the scholars know exactly who came up with that, but Socrates and Plato, talked a lot about that in their teachings. But it was also on a wall of a temple long before their time, and it was to know thyself. And what's interesting about Socrates and his student Plato, the Socratic method, that questioning, and whenever they got into a dialogue, a lot of the strengths came out of, he would just ask really good questions and get people to start thinking. Knowing yourself isn't about reinvention, asking all those questions. It's about discovering the greatness that's already there. And that's where I think knowing yourself is so key. And knowing who you are, it creates this clarity of mind that when you make investment decisions, you're making investment decisions that are deliberate, that generate, passive income, create wealth, and withstand the test of time, because your self-worth and those decisions are based on internal greatness rather than what potential external rewards there might be.
That's a deep one. And I really try to, the first thing I think of is this younger generation that's up and coming. How do they find out who they are? Know thyself is, you could spend a long time trying to discover what that really is. And I think the part that I'm so worried about for the younger generation is the amount that is in their face, and the amount of distraction, and the different ideas that just are bombarding them. How do they achieve that level of knowing who they are? Because the decisions that you make, they will last for the duration of your life. And so how is that achieved?
I don't know if there's one answer to that, but what comes to mind, we did a humanitarian trip to Costa Rica last year with the HXP experience. It was fantastic. It was amazing. I went with my son, Joseph. To watch these youth interact was amazing. And what made it amazing is, one of the rules is when you go on these humanitarian trips, you put your phone up and you don't touch it for 17 days.
Wow.
In fact, it's locked. You can't even get to it. What happens is the youth start putting their feet in the grass and looking around, and then they start engaging with each other instead of texting with each other across the room, right?
Yeah.
But to see the true transformation and the change that I saw each of these kids make towards knowing who they were, what was important to them, and seeing the environment around them, what they were doing, making a difference and impact. That was a sliver, I think, of what our youth can do. And this is what solidified that experience for me. At the airport, they got their phones back in Costa Rica before we headed back. And it was interesting. The whole group was just this tight-knit community, right? They get their phones, and the rest of the trip, they didn't talk to each other. They were glued to their phones.
Dang.
And
Terrible.
And what was interesting, well, that by itself was terrible. But then the anxiety levels of all of those kids, all of the worry, and their shoulders droop. I mean, they just felt the weight of all of what was going on, and we don't realize how much that is affecting us. So I would just say, get a clarity break, and what that means is put the phones away. But as an investor, to get that clarity, I think you need to step away from all of the noise and the distractions so you can get that clarity of who you are, what's important, so you can make the investment decisions that truly matter. I'd like to talk a little bit about self-confidence. And what's interesting about self-confidence, when you go to the root words, confidence, the root words con and then fidens. Fidens comes from fidelis in Latin, and the root word It means faithful, loyal, and trustworthy. Con is with, so essentially when you talk about self-confidence, it is being faithful, loyal, and trustworthy with yourself, your true self. And, a lot of times you hear these books, build self-confidence, fake it till you make it. And while there's elements of truth, putting your mind and body in that state, there's a lot of power to that. But what's interesting is until I actually went through and understood that self-confidence has more to do with being faithful to yourself than this outward, you try to exude self-confidence and it's based on external things or what you do.
I think just first of all, I can relate to it on a personal level. Like there's been times in my life where I could have been at a table with some friends and there's a disagreement. It could be over anything. And if I chose to not honor my values and what I believe in and maybe go along with it or not speak up in that moment, I actually hurt my own confidence because it's kind of a form of standing up for what you believe in. And like, as you mentioned, honoring thyself, it's better, even if the end result is some form of conflict, knowing that you honored what you truly know about yourself. That's where actual confidence comes from. It's not just, it's not the facade. It's just being true to yourself. And I hate to say that phrase because it's so cliche now, like be true to yourself, but it's so real. You have to honor what you value. Otherwise, you'll never respect yourself. And if you can't respect yourself, you're not in a position to really do anything else in life. You're not in a position to be in a relationship or advance anywhere. It's just the most important core thing is to honor what you know about yourself.
I was trying to think of times when I've made investments and they didn't go well, but when I made them for the wrong reason. I'll tell you this experience. So I was a student, a young married student. We had one and one on the way. When you're young and don't have much of anything, right? Every penny you have is important. You're working to cut just to make rent and put food on the table. But we had saved up. I had $10,000 to invest that I wanted to invest. One of my clients said, "Yeah, I've got this investment. It pays all of this." I was like, he says, "Yeah, it gets a 20% return." So I took my $10,000 that I had saved. I had no other savings whatsoever. I mean, I literally it was everything I had. And I gave it to him so he can go put it to work. It was a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. Yep.
I lost all of it. That was a hard blow for me. But had I really known who I was, I would not have made a decision out of greed. I would have been very deliberate with my money. In fact, Warren Buffett even said, if you could only make 20 decisions in your life, or 24, I think he said, in your entire life, and when you make it a financial decision, you'd mark it off, and you only have that in your entire life to make. He said it would change what people put their money into. And he said, most likely you wouldn't even get to the 20 because you're very deliberate at what you do. And I believe that is true. When you're anchored in authenticity, you can make decisions from a place of strength and not external validation.
Right. I can think of a moment of loss for myself investing that where I didn't honor myself. Years ago, I had established a plan to invest in some safer, longer term picks in the stock market, but I got caught up on one kind of fad, I'm going to make a ton of money quickly. And while it went kind of well for a while, it completely tanked. And I still have a couple of shares of it actually. So it's still possible it could come back. But
how long ago was this?
2021.
Hold on, hope.
Oh,
yeah, we're okay. But just the fact that I chose not to honor what I had originally set out to do, this longer term play, and for me it was a safer term play. And then I see all this money going south. Another great example of loss because I got my ego involved and I just didn't honor what I originally set out to do. So
it's funny to me. I think of, to the word confidence and then making these decisions. There are people, mentors and business leaders that I know where they run so fast and they run with such confidence. They know who they are. They know their parameters. They know their buy box, they know what they're looking for, and they make decisions quickly. If it's based on greed, they've practiced how to deflect that. If it's based on making an investment because of who they know, they've found a way to just let that slide off their back because they have their abilities and they run. And I feel like, okay, if I'm trying too hard at something, something's wrong. Either I don't have the right people at the table or I'm over my skis and I need to get the right people involved, right? And you got some humility, but that builds confidence at the same time when you know yourself and what you don't know and what you need to know. And so I've always appreciated, but those experiences come from these failures, right? Those that confidence comes from those learning experiences.
Remember a story where one of the kids said, well, why don't you just let the kite fly? And you're restricting it by keeping the string attached.
Or let go of it, it'll go higher.
Yeah. And it's like, we want it to be free, right? No, nothing that's going to hold it down. And what's interesting is what happens to a kite when it's no longer anchored.
That's up for the wind to decide.
Yeah. It takes off.
Yeah. And it's not long before it's
got nothing.
It just crashes and burns, right? And I think the principle there is the reason the kite can soar and fly is because it's anchored.
Yeah.
And investors that are like that kite and just chase whatever is out there, their investments will be just like that kite in the wind, not doing it unless it is anchored in something that's steady and strong. When you look out at nature and what there's so much beauty in the earth today, and there's so much of the creations that are out there. And one of the most majestic I've always loved are the redwoods. So these trees can get up to 350 feet tall. You can drive a Suburban through the trunk. There's holes that they've built in a trunk of a tree, and you can drive right through it. And I mean, that's how massive these trees are. But what's interesting is when you look at the biology of the tree, and, the bark is 12 inches thick, and the bark is resilient to fire and insects. Thinking of the epic investor, the investor has to be resilient to external forces. There will be fires that come through, but why do the redwoods stand the test of time? And there's some that were living at the time of Christ. Put it into perspective. I mean, couple thousand years old trees, and they're strong. And another thing that they do is the wood contains tannin, and it prevents decay. So that's on the internal piece, right? So the wood is resilient to internal decay. The other thing is if there's a stump, a new branch can grow. If a branch falls down, it can actually sprout a new tree. And the whole concept about the redwoods and the biology, it's amazing because through adversity, there can be a lot of growth, even with these trees. And that's how they withstand. And I think creating that anchor and knowing thyself makes a huge difference when you look to make investments.
That's like majestic. You go out there and you consider it's a sight to behold. I mean, you can't really fathom, if you haven't been there and you haven't seen how massive these trees are. I had never considered, though, that it was well said, Rich, that it's biology that allows it to be so. The 12-inch bark, the thickness of that bark, impenetrable to, anything that would harm another forest of its kind, which allows it to continue to grow. And I think one thing I've always told my kids as they've grown up is I wanted to be like palm trees. Now I guess I need to rephrase that a little bit and start thinking about redwoods. But palm trees they are extremely strong at their base, right? And they can bend with really, really high winds, 100-mile-an-hour winds, bend these palm trees. But then, when that wind leaves, these trees stand right back up, right? And so when you're anchored and rooted and you know who you are and you've got the confidence in the direction you're headed and the people that are around that table, are you going to lose? Perhaps, but because you've done it the right way, those losses are small blows to the grander scheme of the whole picture because you've diversified. You've got the right people in your corner. So,
love that. And when you talked about the storm, I mean, think about these massive trees, and you have severe storms coming through. What happens? You have your root system and your trunk that's just solid, but it's allowed to be flexible. right? And you have the branches and trees that are just moving with the wind, and the wind can do all it can, and there's nothing the wind can do to hurt that tree.
I think just the overall takeaway when you look at anything in life, if you're going to the gym, for example, right? It's that adversity, it's the bending and the burning and all the pushing the weights up. That's what creates the strength to begin with. What creates the foundation. So whatever it is, and I love the tree example because it shows all of the things it's had to withstand over time to create that foundation. The same goes for anything else in life. Investing, it's I think creating that mindset. All the things we go through in life, the challenges, creates the mindset that's necessary to successfully invest or to withstand the storm, so to speak.
Yeah, you talked about the right kind of investor. They don't get wrapped up in that storm, right? They see the storm coming and they can bend with the storm because they're mature enough or they're emotional enough to understand the situation instead of just, I guess I would liken it to, on another podcast, we talked about making the wrong decisions in investments and pulling out altogether and you lose everything would be kind of like going down and, loosening the roots of your tree or, minimizing the foundation that it's built on because you're afraid or you're scared instead of, understanding what's happening. And again, having the confidence that we've made the right decisions and that we've got the right, safeguards in place through any of these investments that are being made. Allows you to kind of see that storm coming and put your jacket on and grab your camera.
Well, Jason, thank you. Because when you think of it that way, when investors are making decisions because of fear or greed, there can't be the clarity, and they're making the decisions for the wrong reason. And a lot of times, because of the fear, especially, they essentially do the exact thing that is making their investments not work. Taking the fear and greed off the table and staying true to who you are and the purpose and the freedoms that you want to enjoy, and having that be the guide to what decisions you're making, and understanding that storms will come. The investor that thinks the pro forma that shows a linear progression of cash flows, that is how reality is, has never been through a storm. And it's understanding that storms come and storms go. In fact, when you look at the scriptures, there's never a scripture I've ever seen that it says, and it came to stay.
Mm-hmm.
It is always, and it came to pass.
Came to pass, yeah.
Right? This too shall pass. And I think having that being grounded allows you the power, the strength, and the fortitude, the foundation to make the decisions when there is a storm, and knowing that by being anchored, it allows you to soar rather than the plummet and fall. Last comment or topic I just want to just close with is understanding the highest and best use of your time, talents, and abilities. There's a fable. It's called The Animal School. You guys heard of that before?
No.
There's a curriculum that all of the animals got together and wanted to put together this curriculum. And, the duck said, well, we want to do swimming. And the eagle said, well, we want to do flying. And the gopher said, well, we want to do digging. And the squirrel said, well, we want to do climbing. And so in their infinite wisdom, they created this school with a curriculum that all the animals had to participate in. And, the eagle absolutely dominated flying. In fact, was far better than his instructors, but had to drop out of flying because he couldn't get the digging down. And so the school, because he wasn't taking all the classes he should, he started failing because he was forced to do something he was not meant to do. And it goes through every one of the animals was an example, right? Of, the duck had to drop out of school because of injuries, because of he had to go out of the track and run instead of swim. I think the concept of the fable really was know thyself, right? And focus on the highest and best use of your abilities. And it's okay if you're really good at something and not very good at others. That's where the delegate and elevate comes in, right? With the OS. Find out what you're really good at, focus on that, and then delegate everything else. But in society, with this success based on external forces, how many times because of our self-worth and what we're trying to do, that we focus our time on trying to become something that we're not.
I think society considers the few, the ones that find what they were meant to do. And they almost, frankly, I believe most people believe it's unattainable, right? Michael Jordan obviously found what he was called to do. The musicians and athletes and some businessmen seem to just fall into what they were called to do. And I think that most people just believe that good for them, but I'm not going to be able to find mine, right? And I'm going to live vicariously through them as I doom scroll and watch them carry out their dreams. So to that, I just say, go for it. Like, the only way you're going to find it is by doing it, right? Go after it. Go discover what that is and read books and, participate in networking opportunities and say yes to uncomfortable situations that stretch and push your limitations that you think you have until you discover, that this is like a natural fit. And man, there are moments. Have you guys seen that movie F1 with Brad Pitt?
Mm-hmm.
There's my favorite part of that movie is when he's on the balcony with the she's responsible for designing the car, and he is telling her there comes a moment where you're just flying and everything gets quiet and you make every turn, you don't hear anything, you can't, there's nobody else on the road except for you and the car. And
no
he's
one
like,
can touch you.
Yeah, no, and that's what he said. No one can touch you. He's like, and I've been chasing that moment, and I don't know when I'm going to find it again, but I'm chasing that moment. And I thought it would seem to me that person found what they were called to do, right? Races cars.
The flow,
being
in the flow.
But you got to be patient and continue to persevere through experience and through opportunity until you get that moment that, the elusive moment of, hey, this is it. I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why that came to mind, but I love the thought. And I guess what I'm reinforcing is it's not going to be quick and easy. It's not supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But it won't ever happen if you're not out there pushing for it.
Yeah, love that.
When I love this story, it actually goes back to that first point of, I think, a culture we've created kind of in the U.S., especially about pursuing what you want to be and not who. Back to my sister's story in Spain, her family friend there, really nice family, the dad owned a little gas station. And to him, that was a great living. It was just what he loved to do. It was his authentic self. Unfortunately, I can think of a lot of people in this country who would make fun of that because you're not an investment banker on Wall Street. Like, you own a gas station? Like, what? That kind of criticism, it's terrible that we've created that culture. But that man, I can tell you, he's so happy. He loves what he does. He makes little bowls too, and these little crafts. He puts his heart into it.
Right.
Love that.
And so he's honoring himself in a way that someone here who maybe loves, the idea of who they are on paper, maybe deep down is actually kind of unhappy because they're not doing. They're like the duck who got hurt trying to run when he's supposed to be swimming. So I really love that story, and we should probably all try and follow that in our own
I'd rather
lives.
hang out with somebody like that than the person that's just miserable, following whatever pattern they were supposed to follow in life and has no purpose.
By the way, in the animal school, the eel became valedictorian because he could do all of the things pretty well.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Well, gentlemen, what did we learn today? It's understand that self-confidence is being faithful to yourself, your authentic self. And in order to do that, you need to know who you are, know thyself. And by doing that, you can make better, or you will make better investment decisions that drives forward purpose and freedom. And my challenge to everyone today is go take a clarity break, put the phones down, get out, get into nature if that's what it takes, and truly just start the process of understanding who you are, what is important to you, then make investment decisions that drives you closer to that purpose.
I love that.
Me too.
Intentional, deliberate energy.
So if you like it, subscribe, share. If you've learned anything, make comments. And as always, we more than welcome people to reach out to us, and we would love to meet you and learn your stories and help in any way that we can. Until next time, signing off.